Hi, I'm Brant Menswar, and welcome to my show, Just a Moment. As a former world touring musician turned keynote speaker and author, I've experienced my share of life-altering moments that have both broken me and propelled me forward. How you leverage those moments or push through them will define your destiny. Each week on my show, I'll provide tools on how to maximize those moments, as well as interview some of the most successful entrepreneurs, entertainers, and athletes on how the power of a single moment changed their life. Join me to learn how to change what's possible for your life. It'll take just a moment. Today's guest has performed on some of the world's biggest stages with one of the world's best-selling bands, Maroon 5. His story of breaking cycles may start on a high note, but transforms into a symphony of loss, redemption, and perseverance. Let's get started.
I'm Ryan Dusick, and this is my moment. Well, I grew up in Southern California in the 1980s, actually right in the middle of Los Angeles, in the West Hollywood, Miracle Mile, Carthay Circle area. My brother and I were both highly overachieving kids. Up until about age 12, 13, I really hadn't experienced failure at anything. Everything kind of came pretty easily to me. However, I was a very shy kid. That was the one thing that was challenging. I didn't like new environments. I didn't like summer camp or social situations where I felt like I had to try to adapt and learn how to get along, probably because I had been so insulated. It was wonderful, but it was probably a little bit sheltered just in terms of that helicopter parenting sort of style. My dad was and is an attorney, and my mom was a homemaker. My parents are from two different backgrounds. My dad is Jewish, and his family immigrated from Eastern Europe about 100 years ago. My dad is very outgoing. He's like the most outgoing person you've ever met. My mom is from Mexico, and me and my brother were first generation born in this country from that side. So a lot of different influences culturally, but also musically. As I became a musician later in life, there was my mom's side of the family. My uncle was a jazz drummer. My other uncle played the guitar with a Latin background as well as jazz. And then my aunt was a Broadway singer, because I had a Broadway star aunt, and my dad was not far behind in terms of being a big personality. In some ways, I think it was difficult to compete with that. And so you can imagine family events, it was hard to get a word in edgewise. There was a lot of attention on them. And so I just kind of put my head down and played my sports and did my schoolwork. And I didn't really recognize that there were a lot of insecurities and anxieties that were latent. And I didn't really know they were an issue until much later in my life.
Despite Ryan's early comforts and successes, there was always something lurking under the surface, something that would come to profoundly affect him years later.
From my parents' perspective, the expectation was that we would go to college, we would get degrees, and probably go on to some kind of professional career, whether it be doctor, lawyer, or otherwise. My dad being the grandchild of Eastern European immigrants and the child of Jewish parents who grew up in the Depression and came west from New York to have a better life. His generation of Jews, I think, in LA were just very upwardly mobile. All of them became doctors, lawyers, businessmen. So I think that generation, it was like, okay, you're going to do something respectable, you know? But then at the same time, we had, some artists in our family, and my dad and my family had seen success in that realm. And so it wasn't far-fetched to imagine that you could go that direction and make a career at it.
With support from his family, Ryan felt encouraged to pursue his dreams. But what exactly those dreams were started to change when he began to experience setbacks in high school.
I kind of feel like I've lived 4 lifetimes already, even though I'm still in my 40s, because the first chapter would be everything before the private high school experience, where I was very insulated and nothing ever went wrong, and I felt like the world was my oyster. And then there was high school, where I experienced my first failures, disappointments, things that I had to adapt to, and had a lot of difficulty doing so because I think I hadn't really built resilience. During that time, I had injuries in terms of pitching, and so baseball became more difficult. I had my first challenges in some of the classes at school, whereas I'd been this straight A student, now I wasn't, and that was challenging for me. But what I discovered was music, and music became my escape. It became my outlet. It became the thing that allowed me to feel understood. In 1991, I was 14 years old, and this was right when Nirvana came out. And I was a disillusioned teenager, feeling like an outcast. I felt like the kid from the other side of the tracks. But Kurt Cobain, Chris Cornell, Eddie Vedder, Billy Corgan, all those guys that were the alternative rockers of the early 90s, they were my heroes, and that was the place that I felt understood and seen and kind of fostered this more introspective side of myself.
Music quickly went from a passion of Ryan's to his life's goal, and his band skyrocketed to international stardom.
Starting a band became my escape. It became my purpose and meaning in life. And that was the next decade of my life. And at that time, it felt like ultimate purpose. However, that's just chapter 3 or maybe chapter 2. There was a whole lifetime in the middle there from age 16 to age 28 when I was in this band that went from my parents' garage all the way up to the biggest stages in the world and had success beyond your wildest imagination with the band Maroon 5. And then I had to walk away from that band right at the height of our success. And basically, I was retired at the age of 28. Then spent the next decade of my life really struggling with depression, anxiety, alcoholism, among other real mental health challenges. I didn't know that if there was going to be another chapter at that point. But then everything changed in my late 30s. When people ask me what I miss or if I miss being in the band, and I say, in some ways, yes, they expect me to tell them all of the glamorous things that I was doing and all of the wealth and success and the opportunities that came with that. That was all great. And I'm very grateful that we got to experience some of those things. We got to meet some of our heroes, Stevie Wonder, Prince, Sting. I mean, you name it. We met like some incredible people. We got to perform on Saturday Night Live and The Tonight Show and David Letterman and tour the world and play in Europe, Asia, South America, you name it. All of that was wonderful and exciting, and I'm very grateful I got to experience it. But what I miss most is actually just the camaraderie of the band, the experience of building something from the ground up with your brothers, with your team, the collaboration, the energy, the connection, and the feeling of purpose and meaning that came when we discovered something new and we realized, oh, we're on to something special. Leaving that was harder for me, I think, than accepting the reality that I wasn't going to make as much money as I thought, or that I wasn't going to be touring the world for the next 20 years, and all those things that were hard as well. But really, it was the loss of identity and connection and purpose in my life that was the real challenge. That was what left me with a void that I was trying to fill by drinking and by just escaping in any way I could and avoiding responsibility, avoiding new connection and purpose. But that was really difficult, being in that interim period where I was just trying to grapple with the loss. I had to go through a grieving process, essentially, grieving the loss of all those things that had been so defining of my self and identity. And I struggled because I didn't really have the skills to do it in a way that was going to be healing. I thought that was just something I was going to have to deal with forever, and that the rest of my life would be this just big disappointing letdown of a life. And then that all changed.
Without connection and without direction, Ryan began to spiral. Faced with massive letdowns and sudden changes, the minor issues of his youth became major obstacles.
I was in my late 30s. My mental health challenges were getting worse and worse. My way of trying to cope was clearly not working. And as a result, I was in the grips of not just general anxiety, but panic disorder, basically having panic attacks on a daily basis. I was basically agoraphobic. I was in a really, really tricky cycle of addiction between thinking that the medications could help me manage the anxiety, but then my real drug of choice being alcohol, where I would just be biding my time trying to not drink, and then eventually I would cave and I'd go on a bender, and that would be a disaster. So I'd go back on the medication for a week or whatever and stop drinking and kind of detox myself. In the process of going back and forth like that, I became dependent on both substances. And every time I was on one, I was withdrawing from the other. So I was just a mess. I was paranoid, I was anxious, and I was just at that place where my life looked insane. I had no control over this thing until a few really humbling moments happened where it was very clear that there was two directions I could go. One of them was going to lead to death eventually, but was certainly going to just continue to be misery. And the other was going to be scary, but it was going to be walking in a direction of healing in a way that I had no way of understanding, because obviously my way of doing it wasn't working. May 29th, 2016, my girlfriend drove me out to the Betty Ford Center here in Southern California. I was drinking the whole way there, checked in with a 0.39 blood alcohol level, still going up because I was drinking in the car on the way in. I told my parents that I was in rehab, but I drew a boundary, which was also new for me. And I said, look, I don't need you to do anything for me. If I need any help, I'll ask you, but this is my journey and I need to do this for myself. I remember the intake. I don't remember being taken to a room. I remember waking up in the detox wing at the Betty Ford Center and being very confused and shaking and terrified. The first couple of days there, calling my girlfriend and saying I don't belong here. I want to go home. This was a mistake. And thankfully, she just encouraged me, like, just give it another night. Just hang in there. Just see if you calm down a little bit. And thankfully, I did. Maybe a week into my stay at the Betty Ford Center, when I was still very anxious, still just trying to deal with the withdrawal of some of the medications that I was coming off of, still terrified and not knowing what direction this was going for me and whether I could handle it, but getting my first inklings that maybe there was something to this.
Ryan's time in rehab was the first major step on his road to recovery. However, there was one moment in particular that amounted to not just a step in the healing process, but a giant leap forward.
About a week or two in, I walked one of the newcomers to the dorm, as they had done for me. And that was the first sort of taste of service that I had gotten, was that even in my totally disheveled state, I had something to offer that was helpful to another human being. I could just carry their bag, show them to their room, and give them the itinerary and just explain what's going on. Just having this first taste of some sense of new purpose, certainly a sense of connection, understanding that there was a program that was bigger than me, that if I would just submit to it, even if I didn't understand it, that it could help me the way it was others. That was already started to build momentum within me, that there was something to this and something that I really wanted to embrace. And then one day we're walking into the lecture hall, just like we did every morning. However, this morning, I'm walking down the aisle toward my seat, and one of the guys at the front holds up the big book of AA and says, hey, well, who wants to read the opening thing today? And I'm like looking around like, not me, not me, not me, not me. And he looks right at me and he goes, hey, Ryan, you haven't read yet. You want to come up and read? And I was like, no. I had just had a panic attack at a Passover Seder like 3 weeks earlier when we were supposed to go around and read. That's how bad my anxiety was at that point. I'm a guy who's been on stage 1,000 times and performed in front of 20,000 people. I performed on live TV in front of 7 million people on Saturday Night Live. And that's how low I had gotten, that the idea of just reading in front of 20 people at a Passover Seder gave me a panic attack. So I was not keen to do this at all. And I was like, no. My anxiety is way too bad. I can't do that. And the guy goes, well, then you have to do it. And he grabs me by the arm and he pulls me up on stage. He puts the big book down on the podium. And I look out over the crowd, and there's probably about 100 people in this lecture hall at the Betty Ford Center. and I've got nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. I open up the book to the page and I start reading, and right away I can tell the panic is coming, right? My voice is shaking, my hands are shaking. It goes into my body and my knees. It feels like my legs are going to buckle and give out. And I just realized I can't continue. So instead of running off or whatever I might have done in the past, which was to try to avoid and escape the uncomfortable feeling, I just paused and looked up at the crowd and I said, I'm sorry, you guys. I have really bad anxiety. I'm going to try to get through this, but I don't know if I can. I'm shaking up here. And I don't know what I was expecting as a reaction from this audience, but immediately they all started cheering and saying, Ryan, you got this. You can do this. And in that moment, I realized all of these people in this room are here for the exact same reason that I'm here. They may have different drugs of choice, they may have different symptoms or reasons why they use, but essentially we're all struggling with the same challenge, and there was compassion for one another. What I realized in that moment was that the way through what I was struggling with was not to run away and avoid it. It was not to avoid responsibility or commitment or trying to find new purpose in my life. It was the opposite. It was walking towards those things. It was walking through those things. And that just in going up to that podium and reading from the big book, I was offering something. Them seeing me struggle and do it anyway was helpful to them. I'd like to say that my anxiety went away immediately in that moment and that I was cured and that the rest of my life has been perfect. Of course, that's not reality, but something shifted and it sent me on a new path. And I realized that the things that made me anxious, the things that made me uncomfortable, the things I had been avoiding were the things that were going to help me grow the most. And I started walking towards things that gave me that feeling. And I got sort of addicted to it because it was like every time I would do something like this and get through it, it was a relief, first and foremost, but then it was a feeling of accomplishment and resilience and a feeling that if I can do that, I can do the next thing. And if I can do the next thing, I can do the thing after that. And just following that, just finding the next challenge that I needed to overcome, led me to graduating that program, going through a 4-month outpatient program after that, finishing that and volunteering as a co-leader of groups and peer support for 2 years, where I discovered that I actually had a talent for offering empathy and compassion to others and articulating the ideas of recovery that they needed to hear, which led to me going back to school to get a master's degree in clinical psychology. I wrote a book about my journey called Harder to Breathe. I got it published. I became a coach and speaker as well as a registered therapist. None of that would have happened had it not been for that moment. If I had just kept avoiding, and every time I felt anxious and felt the panic, I ran away, then the whole 4th chapter of my life that I've been enjoying the last 8 years, it doesn't happen. Life will put in front of you the things that help you grow and give you the lessons that get you to the next place. The only way you don't do that is if you run away from it. You can only be where you are today, and you are exactly where you need to be today.
Ryan, thank you so much for being here. What an incredible moment we've just listened to. Gosh, first of all, just incredibly proud of you for sticking with it and not just getting your life in order, but paying it forward. I think that's not just commendable, but it's part of who you are. The short time that we've had a chance to get to know each other, I could see that empathy and compassion that was shown to you. I think that was part of your turn, and now you being able to give it to others, I think is just amazing. Let's shift. We're going to shift as we do here, and we're going to talk now about a moment you wish you could get back.
I'm not one of those people who believes no regrets, don't have any regrets. I think regrets are opportunities to learn. I would do that different next time, and so you learn. Shame is a different thing. Carrying shame is not helpful, but having regrets, that can be a growing experience. So this moment was probably around 2004. We were about 2 or 3 years into touring on the album Songs About Jane, and we were becoming the biggest band in the world. And I was struggling. I was starting to struggle physically. I was having difficulties playing the drums. My coordination was suffering. I had a lot of pain, chronic pain. To make it worse, I was avoiding these things as much as I could. I was not really dealing with them. I wasn't talking about it with anyone. I was just trying to get through the shows and just bear down, even though inside I felt like this is all going to end badly. That was just sort of the loop that was going on in my head, which was sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy. And I was drinking more. I was behaving in ways that was not consistent with my character. And right around that time, one of my good friends from college, she's gone on to incredible things in her career. She was an unsigned new act at the time. I had made a demo with her and passed it around. Finally, our manager signed her up and put her on the road with us before she had a record deal. And so she was very green. She had not toured at all. She was a theater kid too. And so the world of pop rock music was a little scary to her. We had had conversations before this in which she expressed a lot of reservations about what that world would be like and whether it was a lifestyle that she wanted to live. And I kind of felt like a big brother who wanted to take her under my wing and show her it's going to be okay. This is great, and you don't have to do anything that you're not comfortable with. I had said these things to her, right? We'd had these conversations and I'd given her these pep talks, but now she was on the road with us and she was opening for us at a moment in my life when I was not in a position to be the role model that I had hoped I would be. She didn't have to tell me for me to know that she was disappointed in me, that my behavior, the way that I was acting, the lifestyle that was kind of going on around behind the scenes at this time was exactly the thing that she was scared about. I think at the time, again, I was rationalizing all of this in my mind. It was like, well, I'm struggling, so I'm just trying to have some fun, and it's okay because the normal rules don't apply anymore. We're just in this weird, crazy circus, and maybe she'll have fun too. But I think even then, in the back of my mind, there was still a part of me that was like, Sarah's not happy with this. I just wasn't living up to the ideals that I had created for myself and that I had wanted to project as, the big brother figure. And so I never did make an amends with her until very recently when I had invited her to come on my show and interviewed her. The singer-songwriter Sarah Bareilles, who is very well known, very popular. And she was lovely. And I could tell from her response that I wasn't making this up. She had definitely thought about this. It wasn't to the extreme that I had built it up in my mind. I mean, she understood that I was struggling, that was a hard time in my life. However, she seemed appreciative that I, took the moment to apologize to her and to make amends and said, Ryan, you can let go of this now. You can put this down. I know who you are and, I love you.
I love, the thought, and that's really what this show's all about, is that it just takes a moment, and that moment can change everything for you. And so there are moments that catapult you forward, there are moments that pick you off the ground, and there are moments that allow you to shed burdens. One of the things you said that really stuck out with me is that you sort of were suffering in silent a lot. I think that's more common than people understand. What would be some advice you'd give to these people who, up to this point, have chosen to suffer in silence?
Whether you're struggling with addiction or anxiety, depression, or really any other mental health challenge, it's very common to feel or to think that no one else is experiencing what I'm experiencing. I remember thinking to myself, well, if other people knew how I feel on a daily basis, they wouldn't begrudge me drinking as much as I do. Nobody can understand what it's like to go through a day in my body, how uncomfortable it is. There was just this exceptionalism in my mind that my form of suffering was greater and different than anyone else out there. And that if other people could experience what I'm experiencing, they would be basically living the way that I was living. One of the things that changed that for me, of course, was the community at the Betty Ford Center, and very quickly realizing we were all in the same boat, even if we had slightly different symptoms and different challenges. We were all grappling with essentially the same problem. And that is a very comforting feeling to know that there are others in your situation and to know that others that have been in your position have overcome it. I think that just the the first step of sharing what's going on for you, give people the benefit of the doubt that they might have some understanding or at least some empathy. And we sometimes shy away from those conversations because they're uncomfortable and you might hear something that's really dark. Who wants to hear their loved one tell them that they've been having suicidal thoughts, or that they've really been struggling with substances or self-harm or all these things that can be really scary if somebody in your life is struggling with them. By being able to hold space for them, to be able to hear that, even if it is difficult, to have empathy and not jump to fixing it, to just be a witness, to just take the time to understand what's going on for them. You're offering a gift because that person then can feel understood in a way that they didn't before, can feel less alone. At the core of any mental health challenge, but addiction in particular, is this lack of connection, this spiritual disconnect where you feel disconnected from the world around you. So any glimpse that you have a connection, whether it be to one person or to something larger than yourself, a higher power or a community, that goes a long way to pull you out of that small little world that keeps getting smaller and smaller. And that's why the 12-step community can be so great. Even if you're not crazy about the whole program and everything, just walking into a room with people that you have some connection with, at the very least you both have struggled with the same thing, that can be just the first inkling that there's something out there for me beyond this tiny little world that I've ended up in.
That's amazing. Great advice, brother. Great advice. Thank you so much. If people want to continue to follow your journey, to get the book, to listen to the podcast, what's the best way for them to stay in touch with you?
Well, everything you just mentioned is on my website, ryandusick.com. Instagram is a good place to look at just what I'm doing on a daily and weekly basis with the podcast and stuff. That's at Ryan Michael Dusick. The Harder to Breathe podcast has new episodes every Tuesday. That's kind of like my main public forum right now. You can find it on all platforms and on YouTube. We do the video element as well. And my book, Harder to Breathe, you can find it on my website. You can find it on Amazon, wherever you buy books.
Thank you so much for taking some time to join us here on Just a Moment. Thank you for the inspiration, and thank you for caring enough to give back. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Just a Moment. Make sure to subscribe to our podcast and tell a friend or two about it to help spread the word so everyone can find a moment that inspires them. Don't forget to leave us a review and check us out on the web at justamomentpodcast.com. Just a Moment is produced by Natalie Von Rose and Brant Menswar. For more inspiring shows like this, visit surroundpodcasts.com.